My name is Seth Donnelly. Jump right over that.
I teach U.S. history, civics, and economics, and I've been teaching within our district now for my 16th year. And I also advisor to some of the clubs.
I think taking the time that we are looking at Native American civilizations, and this week we're going to be looking.
So, before teaching here, I lived in Chicago after college from 1993 to 1999, basically for about 7 years. And I did a bunch of political activism in Chicago. I was working with different groups around issues pertaining to police brutality, the death penalty, political prisoners, and I was working with people who had loved ones who were in prison, including on death row, who were innocent. I was working with family members of political prisoners.
I think calling Mr. Donnelly a bit of an activist is an understatement, considering Mr. Donnelly is the activist of Los Altos High School. I think Mr. Donnelly is the person who arranges most of the clubs and most of the protests and most of the large activist gatherings that are a part of the school and outside of the school.
He cares. Mr. Donnelly really, really cares about his students, and he cares that they learn. In his classroom, like the environment of like being in his class, you can really see that because he doesn't just want you to punch your ticket and get through civics or econ or U.S. history or whatever class you have with him. He wants you to learn about it. He wants you to care about it because it's stuff that is going to directly impact you, especially with civics and econ. It's like laws, it's rights, it's the economy, it's what's affecting you and what's going to continue to affect you. And he understands that it's important and he cares about it.
In Chicago, I was able to, I had a job in Chicago for a few years between like early to mid-90s, where I was the director of the Illinois Coalition Against the Death Penalty. And as it sounds, the goal of the group was to push to get the death penalty abolished in Illinois.
He has talked about his work with like death row, inmates in Chicago. I think that's really honorable. It's very noble. You hear a lot in the news when people that have been wrongfully convicted are killed, and then they're like, well, oops, like, sorry, like, how do you handle that?
Because there were people who were clearly guilty, but we started to research some of these cases of innocence, and one of them was a man named Aaron Patterson, and I got to be close with his mom. She was on the board of directors of the Illinois Coalition. Aaron's an African-American man who, as we dealt and did more research, we became convinced that his claims of innocence were correct. That his mom always believed him, but myself and some outsiders, the more we got to know her, the more we got to know him, the more we researched it, it became clear that he had been tortured by the Chicago police, that he had given a confession that was not legitimate, and that there was no other reliable evidence to tie him to this. Is a double homicide, a home invasion and double homicide in Southside Chicago.
And I know that it's not always a guarantee that what's right is going to win, but that's part of like why you're doing it, because you want to give it that fighting chance. You want to give these people the justice they deserve, and I think that's something important. And it goes back to him caring about things and caring about students and caring about community members and just caring about the world in general.
And after 7 years of agitation, many people were working on this. The governor of Illinois, who was a Republican, freed Aaron and said that, in fact, he had been tortured, he was innocent. Aaron, by that time, had spent a total of 13 years on death row. Our campaign had been going on relentlessly for pretty much the last 7. And so when he was freed, I had already moved out here, but I'd still be going back the last 2 years and doing work in some of the summer to free Aaron and maintaining some of that campaign. So he was freed, I believe, in December before Christmas. He was pardoned by Governor George Ryan, and then I flew back to Chicago, and that weekend that Aaron got out, I stayed with the family, with Mrs. Patterson, and went to church with Aaron for the first time. He'd been to church in 15 years, this South Side small African-American church, and we walked into church together, and the congregation stood up, and the pastor said, "Aaron Patterson has come home."
And some people are going to say, wow, that is amazing, that's something inspirational, and other people are going to look at it and say, this is a disruption to society, you should accept, the ruling, he's supposed to die, he did an awful thing. And sometimes he did do an awful thing, and sometimes it is how it is, but other times there are people that are wrongfully convicted all the time, and they overturn rulings all the time. And I feel like it takes a certain level of just, you have to have balls to be willing to say, look, I know that a lot of people might not support this, but I support this. And he's willing to do that, and that's something that sets him apart from other people.
There was a series of, you might recall, there was a series of protests throughout the country against police brutality, and especially in the aftermath of the failure to achieve an indictment of Officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson. There was, and then that same month in December, there was the failure of the grand jury in New York to indict the officer for the chokehold death of Eric Garner. And I encouraged the students that if they wanted to do something constructive, that I would be there with them. Because I think that's part of the role of a progressive educator, is to encourage activism, not to dictate it, but to encourage it, of course. And then people need a little bit of learning, like here's how you do a press release, here's how you interact with the media, here's how you do a march. And so I was happy to provide some of that guidance, just like people had provided it for me when I was younger.
Yeah, the Talon covered the March of Justice last year, and I was there as a photojournalist, and it was really interesting to see something like that come out of what I would consider a conservative place like Los Altos.
Yeah, it was fantastic. That was one of my high tides of teaching so far. The energy that came together, especially before that first march, where there was just people making signs, voluntarily getting supplies, getting sound systems together, and just communicating at 10 o'clock at night, and via text, and people meeting to spray paint banners, and then all coming together and having such a dignified march of about 200 people and getting positive press.
It was definitely something that I was excited about, because it was an issue that I really cared about. It was something that I felt passionately about, and it was something that I was worried I wasn't going to be able to show my support for, because I live in a relatively conservative town, and I was raised in a relatively conservative household, and it wasn't something my parents were super thrilled about. They were like, "You are not going to that," and I was like, as a journalist, I'm going, and as a human being who cares about this, I'm going. And so they were like, okay.
What was profound was to say that even in young people here, that they wanted to stand in solidarity with that growing movement across the country, saying Black Lives Matter, that we have to put an end to this kind of abuse of power and this kind of institutionalized racism in our society. So it was fantastic and then to see the young people lead the march, to give speeches, we had music. Oscar Martinez did some good music. There was some poetry. So it was a great moment. We put this area, two things. One is we put Mountain View and even Los Altos on the larger map of the Bay Area, saying that the activism that's happened in the Bay Area is not just within the traditional sort of zones like Berkeley or San Francisco or Oakland, that there are people throughout the area, including the peninsula down here, which is often viewed as being more privileged or corporate, but within this area there's people who feel these concerns and want to be in solidarity and are in solidarity. And that's an important message to send throughout the Bay.
You know high school kids are going to show up if they say, oh, there's going to be free pizza, or oh, there's going to be donuts. But having high school kids show up after school, like right before finals, to do something purely about being like empathetic and understanding the pain and the struggles and supporting other people through their pain and struggle. It really says a lot about the community as a whole, and the people that came and the people that supported and the people that wanted to be there, and the people that were there. And I think that's something that you can't really see in any other setting, because it's more than just liking a page on Facebook or sharing an article on, Twitter. It's showing your support and letting yourself, be vulnerable to people being like, why did you go to that? Or do you really support that? It's a way to really show that you support something.
I think that the thing that unifies us is a spirit. And the spirit is that life is precious, that it's short, that what we do in this short time frame we have together really does matter. It's as we say, solidarity for life, solidarité pour la vie.